Claudia Lash here, and I'm again talking about decorative stitching with fancy threads on your sewing machine fusible piece. I wanted to show you how I set up my machine. The last time I talked about threads in a previous video, I think I forgot to say that when I choose my threads, I choose a thread which I'm hoping will show up. And oftentimes a contrasting thread will show up better than one that goes right along with whatever color you're using. And I thought I would show you here, this thread shows up very nicely. But this thread out here, since it's so light compared to the outside purple, it really shows up rather well too. So oftentimes I may choose a green thread to go on yellow or orange, something that is going to show. If I'm putting a lot of work in here on some things, I really want that to show up. So think about that. You want a contrasting thread, or a contrasting thread will show more. Then we're ready to look at how we set up the sewing machine. So let's take a close look at my sewing machine. Okay, I'm getting ready to set my machine up to do some stitching, and I wanted to show you how I set my machine up. Every machine is a little different, but there's a lot of similarities in what we do to get ready for using fancy threads. For the first thing, I have one of these thread holders back here, and it gives the thread a little longer span. I think it's very helpful. So I stick my thread on this, and that seems to make it sew a little bit better. You don't have to have it. You can always use a, there's lots of makeshift ways you can make one of those. Then I thread my machine with the correct needle in, like I talked about last time. And then it's time to take a look at what we have in the stitches. In my machine, we have lots and lots of stitches, and they are shown right here. What I usually will do is I will go to right here, because this is where the decorative machine's stitches begin. And they're in different folders. I'm going to show you, here's one folder, and there's lots of stitches in this folder. Lots and lots and lots. One of the most common stitches that I use is in this folder. This is the blanket stitch, 1329. Now, it's going to be different on every machine, but this is a single blanket stitch, and this is a double blanket stitch. But I'm not going to do the blanket stitch today. I thought we would try something else. Let's look at, well, let's go back here. Let's look at this machine. No, this is one I just used recently. I used that on here. It's kind of a big stitch, but it has a center line. If you find a stitch that has a center line, it will be a little bit easier for you to follow. So, in this stitch, this is the default setting. It's 9 wide and 9.5 long. If you don't want it quite that big, or you want to mess with it, this is where you do it. You can mess with your stitches and change them just a little bit. Some of these I've just left the same. But when you have this set up to be the stitch you want, then the main thing that you have to remember to do is go to where your tension is. My tension is at 2.75 for this stitch, which is lower. Usually that number is around 5. But I am going to even take it down even more. I have been taking this down to like 2.25. Whichever stitch you use, I always change my bobbin tension, because you don't want that bobbin thread to show. here are some stitches that you can try. This is another one that has a, let me put it up here. This has a center spine, so it's going to be a little bit easier to use. This is a sort of a ladder type stitch, which has a center spine also. If you get a stitch, even this one right here with these, like a star look, it's rather easy because you can follow right along on that center line of it. When you're doing the stitches, you must remember when you're setting up your machine, and this is something you always have to do, and I sometimes mess up. You have to have a throat plate. That's your wide throat plate that you would use with a zigzag stitch. You also need to have a foot on your machine that's wide enough so that your machine can go back and forth and up and down. You know, you don't want to use your little 1/4 inch single hole throat plate or foot. So once I pick a stitch that I think I might want to do, I also try it out before I'm ready to use it on my good thing. I have a scrap piece of fabric with stabilizer on it, and I bring it over here and I try it out. And oftentimes I'll see that one thread is not looking as thick or not looking as good, or maybe it's too big, so I try it smaller. And this is my practice piece. I also, on my practice piece, will write out what the stitch number is and what the length and the width of the stitches are, because this is 405, it's default, and it's 9 and 9.5. That way, if I want to switch them up a little bit, if I want to make them a little smaller, I can do that, and I can later go back here and say, oh, well, how big was this one? And I can check it and see what I changed it to for a certain area. So have this practice. Look, I have lots of practice pieces. It takes a lot of practice to be able to get your stitches just the way you like them. So I always try out on my practice pieces before I go to the real thing that I'm ready to work on. And I think that's the main thing on trying out or setting up your machine.